everyone, it's Courtney and welcome back to a new video. I am really excited about today's topic. Today's topic is 5 coming of age novels that I think you should read in your 20s. This topic came from a reel that I posted on Instagram that just got a lot of engagement, and I had a lot of people messaging me and commenting about how they had bought the books and read them and totally agreed, and it was just super helpful for people. So I decided I wanted to make this my first full-length listicle video. The reason that I chose this topic is that I turned 26 in July. In my whole life, I put a lot of these really tight deadlines and milestones on my life, which obviously is not realistic. And as I've grown and learned, I'm 26. I haven't gone back to grad school. I am married, but I don't want kids anytime soon. And so I've just kind of realized that we all set timelines and we all have a vision for what our future looks like. But as you actually start get into your 20s and you start living your first life of independence, those don't always pan out. And what you thought you wanted is not actually what you wanted. So through last year and through reading, I've read a lot of books that have kind of helped me process and think through these things, and have also taught me a ton about growing up and what it means to change and learn and develop and to give yourself grace to do those things. Like I said, I'm approaching this from the viewpoint of your 20s because that's the stage of life that I'm in. I also think that you're never too old to learn these lessons. And so even if you're watching this and you're in your 30s or your 40s, you can still read and engage with these books, and I still think take something valuable from them. So yeah, without any further ado, I will get started with my first book. So the first one I'm going to recommend is The Regrets by Amy Bonifants. I bought this book on a whim, kind of based on the cover, because I was thinking it would be more of a paranormal type romance. What this turned out to be, and I jokingly refer to it as all the time, is existential erotica. There is a lot of sex in this book. There's a lot of sex on the page, but that's because this is a book about relationships. So The Regrets is about Thomas, a young man who dies. And after his death, there is some sort of processing error. And so he's sent back to Earth, where he has to live for an additional 30 days while they figure out what's going on and can actually send him to the afterlife. There are a lot of rules within his existence for 30 days. The largest one being you're not allowed to have physical or emotional relationships with anybody who is living. Of course, he meets Rachel, who's a young librarian, and as you all can probably figure out, they break that rule. So this book is about Rachel and Thomas's relationship and the problems that each of them bring, the baggage that each of them bring into that, and how they work through that separately and together. And Rachel struggles with what she calls the daydream. So she can't ever find a partner because she has this idea of what the perfect relationship should look like, and nobody ever fits that until she meets Thomas, and she thinks that he is her daydream. And so they become very codependent. The things that I learned from this book were about the ideas that we have about love and about our relationships and about ourselves. Within this book, she also talks about academia and how we all spent way too much on college, but we get out and we don't know what we want to do, so we feel like we're wasting our life, and then we regret going back to college, and this endless cycle that you have of trying to figure things out and envisioning your life one way and then it never really living up to that expectation. And so it's a really heavy subject matter. I mean, it is about life and death, and there is mention of suicide and depression, but she also carries it and writes it in such a light way where I refer to it a couple times as reading an SNL skit, where that there's substance there, but it's more bearable. I loved this book because it just really hit on how I feel as a millennial in my 20s after, living in a post-2008 world and having all of these ideals and these standards that my grandparents and parents have passed down that are unachievable. One of those ideals being like the American dream and the American family and the white picket fence, and how that's not how love works. And that like love is not clean and pretty and nice. Like love is messy and codependent, and there are bad cycles that you can get into. So if any of that sounds relatively interesting to you, then yes, I would definitely once again recommend reading The Regrets by Amy Bonifants. Okay, so the next one is Severance by Ling Ma. Quick warning, this is a pandemic novel, so if you do not want to think more about that, then I would not recommend reading this at this point. But beyond it being a pandemic novel, it's also a novel about the workplace. And the kind of idea behind Severance is that a pandemic hits the US and everybody tries to go about their business. They try to kind of ignore what's happening. And it only seems real when it starts breaking down like the capitalistic society that we live on. So when people stop coming into work and they stop answering their emails. And so Severance is about Candice Chen, who is a daughter of first-generation immigrants. And she is one of kind of the holdouts of this societal ideal of like, everything's okay as long as we can still work. So Candice has been working at her first job for a while. She's not happy. It's not what she wanted to do, but she feels a sort of dedication to this job. And so when the pandemic hits, she volunteers to be one of the people to stay in the office and work. Well, that doesn't pan out, and her coworkers stop showing up, but she still goes to work every day, and she still tries to be productive, and she still holds on to this dream of what a workplace and what her work life should look like, as everybody around her is basically turning into zombies. And one day she realizes that even though she was promised this big payout for doing this, nobody's around to give her that. And so she decides to leave New York. So to me, Severance really talked about capitalism and living in a capitalistic society and what that means as someone who has dreams and has ambitions. Like you do just kind of have to get the job so that you can work, so that you can live. And even though you might have had all of these different dreams when you graduated or when you entered the workforce, like those aren't necessarily realistic, and you just have to make ends meet. And so she's very lost, and she ends up going on this big journey across the US with this group of survivors. And I won't spoil anything, but like there's a lot of learnings that happen through there as well about like what real life is. So that's Severance by Ling Ma. The next one is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. So Such a Fun Age centers around Amira Tucker, who is a young Black woman working as a nanny for a wealthy white family. Specifically, the mother of the family is Alex, and she is kind of this Instagram influencer blogger. Amira doesn't know what she wants to do with her life. She just graduated college. She has her first job, but she's not making enough to like make ends meet and pay her rent. And so she's nannying on the side. Well, one night she goes to a grocery store with the little girl that she nannies for, and a white woman reports her to security because she thinks that she's kidnapped the child. Well, she's approached by the security guard, and she tries to defend herself verbally, and a fellow customer gets it on film, and he approaches her and says, "Hey, do you want this video so that you can like submit it to the media and basically take this grocery chain down for being racist?" And she's like, "No, I want to forget that it happened." He ends up sending her the video anyway, just so that she has it, but she just wants to kind of move on with her life. Well, Alex, her boss, finds out that all this has happened and is mortified. So she decides that she's going to like take Amira under her wing and try to help her be more ambitious and figure out her life. And things do not go to plan. Alex is basically just embodying like what it is to be a performative ally. She doesn't actually care about Amira. Amira also doesn't really want or need her help. Amira has friends that are really supportive. She, yes, is a little lost, but she also doesn't need Alex to come in and save her and help her figure this out. I learned a lot about performative allyship and microaggressions, and this book really just made me take an introspective look as a white woman and start to understand a little bit more about how I influence and contribute to systemic racism. Beyond that, I also learned a ton from Amira. One of her big conflicts throughout the novel is that she's about to turn 26 and get kicked off her parents' healthcare, which as I was reading this, I was also about to turn 26 and get kicked off my parents' healthcare. But beyond that, you also get to watch her struggle to figure out what she wants to do. And so yes, she is a little lost, but like she's not unhappy or upset with where her life is right now. It's more just like a means to an end or a necessity. And you also get to see her work through some toxic relationships in her life and learn to stand up for herself and remove her from those situations and understand that like letting go is hard and letting go is scary, but it's important. And you need to do that throughout your life. And like, how do you cope with that? I also just really loved the ending of this novel because you get a future look at Amira that's so realistic and so satisfying. It's not like a big fictionalized, everything is okay now and I figured it all out. Like you still see that 5-10 years in the future, she's still growing and learning to work through these things. So that's Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. The next one is Temporary by Hilary Leiker. Temporary is a surrealist absurdist fiction about an unnamed narrator in a world where there are basically two kinds of people. There are people who are born into permanent jobs, basically. Like every aspect of your character fits perfectly into an occupation and like your occupation is who you are. And then there are temporaries, which are people who are not born knowing exactly where they fit or not having an exact fit in regards to work. And so our narrator is a temporary and you get to watch her go through all of these really wild jobs. Like she's a pirate. She's a barnacle because the coral reefs are dying. And so they're sending people out to basically replace these ecosystems. All of these really crazy absurd jobs, but there's also a really meaningful lesson in it. And that lesson is that you get to see her change who she is. You get to try and see her fit into this mold so in order to perfectly replace someone. And that's not healthy. And I think that as somebody who is very ambitious, I put a lot of weight in my job and a lot of my self-importance on my job. And I am not my job. And this is something I have to remind myself all the time because I do find myself changing who I am and I lose myself in my job. And that's exactly what you see this narrator do, this main character do. And you also see her kind of work through why that's not okay and why that's not healthy. And it is deeply personal and it is a very important story about how we think about and structure our life based on our jobs, not based on who we are as people, which is something that I feel like we need to talk more about as a society. So that is Temporary by Hilary Leiker. Last one I'm going to talk about in detail is Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. So Nothing to See Here is about Lillian, who was like a brilliant student and got accepted on scholarship to this private school where she meets Madison. There is a scandal where Lillian takes the blame so that Madison's father, who's like a senator, his reputation won't be ruined. So Lillian takes the blame, and she's ultimately kicked out of this school, and she kind of loses her direction there because she feels like she's let everybody down. She's embarrassed. She also didn't do the thing that she was accused of. So her life begins to spiral. She had this bright future and all these ambitions, and she just ends up living in her mom's attic. Well, after 10 or so years afterwards, she is contacted by Madison, who's her roommate, who she still like idolizes and looks up to. And she has this really toxic relationship with Madison, but Madison asks her to move in to her house to take care of her 2 stepchildren. So Madison has just married a man who had divorced his wife, and his wife commits suicide and leaves him custody of these 2 children that he abandoned. The twist is that the children, when they experience intense emotion, literally spontaneously combust and catch on fire. So Madison asked Lillian to come kind of shield her family, her son and her husband, from these 2 stepchildren that she now has, and be a full-time nanny throughout the summer until they figure out what to do with them. So Lillian accepts, and she moves in, and she starts to kind of rekindle this relationship with somebody who is really not a healthy presence in her life. You also see her start to try and help and teach these children and teach these children the same lessons that she's trying to learn, which is like what it means to be valued and respected and loved, how to deal with your emotions and strong emotions. So there's a lot of lessons that way, but you also get to see her work through her own struggles with her mother and step in as that figure. And so you see a lot of development about what it means to be a motherly figure, but not be a mother, which I really like as somebody who works with children and really enjoys working with children, but does not really know if I want children myself. So it's just all around so sweet, so heartwarming, hilarious. It's a tears of joy kind of read, which I always enjoy. But That's Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. So 2 more. These are honorable mentions. I'm not going to go super in depth in these, but I did want to just call them out. The first one is Una Out of Order, which is about a girl who every year at midnight time travels, kind of like her consciousness travels to her body at a different stage of life. So she time hops through her own life. It's a really interesting concept. It didn't quite reach the level of development that I wanted from it, so I didn't give it as high of a rating as I did all of these. These are all 5-star reads for me. It's a really interesting exploration about how your mental growth doesn't always equal your physical growth in the most literal sense ever, but it still has an important lesson to teach, and it is an enjoyable read. And the next one is Queenie by Candice, Carty-Williams. It's about a young Black woman in the UK and her struggles with finding her way and dealing with trauma. And the reason that I wanted to give a shout out to this one is because of the way that it deals with mental health and how you have to learn to prioritize and take steps to affect your mental health, which is something that I had to learn kind of the hard way. I have only recently started going to therapy, which is something I have gained so much from and wish I would have done at a much younger age, but there is such a stigma still around seeking help, and this just helps kind of destigmatize and break down those barriers while also talking about the effects of trauma when it comes to growing up. So that's Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams. That's everything for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that this was helpful and that you found some good reads. And if you're experiencing any of these problems or in any of these stages of life, that these books can kind of help you, guide you through. The next video will be on Monday with my weekly reading update. And until then, like, subscribe, comment, follow me on Instagram at NotSoWellRead, all of the things, and I'll see y'all later. Bye!